after the initial introduction of the Tops high-impact X-008 prototype axe. This is a field axe that we introduced earlier this year from SHOT Show with the gentleman from Tops. And after, of course, there was a thorough, detailed description of the manufacture of this prototype. And we also conducted a lightweight material test cut on a silk shirt, if memory serves, and with some minor side effects. However, it's time to put this edge to a more extreme test, and of course, in this case, we're going to use this on a partially submerged, well, not submerged, partially exposed root of a tree. Normally, obviously, you would use some type of entrenching tool to dig soil from around the wood part of the root. Obviously, you want to put the edge of your axe to the least amount of abrasive material, sand or dirt, etc. In this case, since this is a more extreme test, we will not trench around the soil of this. We're going to use the back spike to partially dig this out a bit. And again, just to get a feel for some field cutting, and of course we're kind of getting an idea of just how deep this root may be by placing some sounding, if you will. Okay, this is pretty exposed, or not exposed, it's quite a bit of root under this dirt area. Again, normally you would use an entrenching tool, shovel, etc., to excavate around the wood material. In this case, I think we're just going to get right into some of the actual cutting to start bringing some of this out. Of course, you never know what you're dealing with when you get to the subterranean part of a root. And it can be a little deeper than expected. In this case it is. And it looks like there's even more material deeper than that. So, with that said, of course, proper eye protection always necessary. And I cleaved this section root that's a little more than an inch one way, but 3/4 of an inch in diameter on the other end. And we will continue. Now we've excavated a little more material from around the root. We'll glove back up. And of course we've taken a few more attacks here and here. This area, and we'll try to excavate it a bit with the edge of the blade, which would not normally be recommended unless necessary. Looks like we've got some more root material in here. This seems to be anchoring straight down a bit. However, it appears that we have gone through this section of root here. So there may be a bit of a taproot straight down from here, because we've currently removed most of these sections. Wow, significantly wider here than I thought. Well, even though we're not yet ready to remove this root, I think it's pretty safe to say that the cutting edge of this axe does perform quite admirably, even if my strokes aren't necessarily the most refined right now. So we'll just get some depth here, or some depth test. Wow, and even on this moist, relatively healthy root here, the edge is really biting into this wood, even though it's protected by a lot of soil, and it's wet soil on top of it. So we're going to continue with this and see how this performs. Now, after a bit more chopping and, frankly, some excavation from around the sides of the root, in an attempt not really to spare the edge any abrasion, but really in more of an attempt to more effectively in my attempt to remove this root, it appears that this is what may be referred to as something of a ball root. And of course, you never know what you're getting into when you go subterranean, even though this is only by a few inches. But we have a larger section of root here. This root here has been severed, as you may be able to tell from the lifting of the ground here. So that is completely severed. We're going to continue working around here on some of these sections in an attempt, again, to fully remove just this part. I've wanted to keep this in the same shot so as to not be called into question as to using a favorite area or using any other excavation or cutting methods. But again, also didn't want to just continue running with just a lot of dead time. Eye protection. Again, after moving a little bit of soil and some of the chips out of the way, and by basic general feel, looks like we may be about halfway through on this section, or a bit more. And there we are through all the way to the soil. spike does have a tendency to bounce out for the most part. I've done a bit more reconnaissance on this route, and as you can see here, this section was completely removed. This route here that was connected is severed, and I'm not finding, with the exception over here, there appears to be another anchor point at about this position. So at this point, and I'm no arborist, but I think that the section of root would be moving a bit more if in fact it were not maybe perhaps anchored directly underneath this position. So what I had hoped to be a relatively short test in progress, or part of this test in progress, has not resulted in same. We are all the way through this section of root, but again, using the pry technique, this is not coming out anymore. And again, not advisable under most circumstances, but using this axe as a bit of a pry tool, I'm not getting much movement at all from the root itself. I'm using just about all upper body weight in an attempt to fulcrum that out, and it's just not happening, or attempt to get it to pivot out. So we've at least had an example of the cutting effectiveness of this blade. The back spike, I doubt that, just based upon the angles, those intended to be an anchor point, as I had attempted to use earlier. More of a, see how it doesn't really want it to bury itself very deeply. I mean, there we've got a good position if you were to want to put it in reverse and then use the edge of the axe as a cutting implement with two hands, using the implement that way. But just looking at this and seeing the effectiveness on what I thought was a dead root, but apparently it must be a live root just based upon its condition on the inside, it is probably more of a demolition spike than anything else. So with that in mind, well, there we go, we didn't get the right desired spot. See, and again, it split this section here a bit more. So more of a demolition spike than an anchor spike, although it probably will work that way in a pinch. So for right now, we're going to move on to another target. We'll do a little closer look at the Tops High Impact X-008 prototype after the first series, if you will, of more heavy-duty applications of this field axe, or hatchet. It's kind of in between with the length of the handle. Now, I'd like to add that the curved nature of the handle definitely helped with regards to strokes, impact strokes, and reduction of a certain amount of intensity to the hands and the arms, and it just made the chopping use, either single-handed or double-handed, a bit easier because of the ergonomics of that. Plus the handle, at least in my hand, whether without gloves or with gloves, and in this case it was leather gloves, the ergonomics worked really well for me personally. Now, and of course, this was not super heavy-duty chopping. You saw the size of the root, and so I wouldn't have expected any real, extensive, not necessarily trauma, but reaction on the wrists or the forearms with that type of chopping. But that said, I think that the ergonomics of the handle might have helped just a bit with working with it, and of course getting in closer with some of the digging with the back spike. Now, the only cleanup that has been done on this hatchet axe, if you will, is simply some water, rinsing off the surface and wiping it down to make sure it's dry. I've not applied any lubricant or oil of any type or any other protective coating, because I'd also like to see how the exposed parts of the axe react over time. The edge on this has a very slight amount of roll right here, and I've already run my thumbnail over different parts of this, and the only area that there's any bit of roll is right about there again. And maybe I should actually use some type of a scraping device to do this instead of just the thumbnail, but traditionally that's what we usually use, and that gives you the best tactile reaction. There is no rolling from this side that I can recall, and maybe just a slight bit there, and I don't know if that's roll or just a little bit of an impact to the edge of the axe. On the other side, it definitely felt like a bit of a roll to the edge. However, not heavy duty, not extensive, more into the blade itself. Something that I did find a little interesting is on the back spike. The back spike has a bit of deformity. I mean, it actually took a bit of a pinch or a twist right here, and hopefully that will come in a bit better. But you can hear it here, and it just again, I'm not sure that I struck anything very hard, because even though this was cutting into some dirt, there were no rocks that I could see or anything really hard that it would have impacted with. So I'm a little surprised at the deformity at the very tip of this, again without it having struck anything super significant other than dirt and wood. The surface of the finish, this bake-like surface that Topps put on it, held up really well. There are obviously some scratch marks there because it was going into wood and into dirt. On this side we have just a bit of scratching through all the way to the metal, but for the most part the finish is pretty heavy duty and held up really well. Not that I would expect that to be very long term, especially if you're really using this hatchet or this axe quite extensively. But that is somewhat it in a proverbial nutshell. Trying to see if we can catch anything else that might be standing out on this edge. I think the next step in this is to try to have a sheath made and to actually carry this in the field a bit more, perhaps a little more extensively. But that's it as a quick wrap up for the first actual field application type use of this axe.